We also often experience the need to give. Sometimes it's give something back to other people or reward ourselves. We like to call these self gifts, and research has shown that self gifts motivate us, they reward us, and they allow us to console ourselves. So, self gifting is actually a really important part of kind of consumer behavior, and frankly, the American psyche, and I would argue Western psyche. Okay, I am going to discuss a study in the next slide, but I want to talk about this bias that people tend to have, which will then partially explain kind of the effects you see in the study in the next slide, on the next slide. So there is a theory called "what is beautiful is good." That's the old name for it. People might call it something else now. And what it says basically is that people tend to attribute desirable characteristics to more beautiful people. We tend to look at beautiful people and believe that they're more sociable, they're more friendly, they're more warm, they're more competent. And because of these things, people who are beautiful tend to get a leg up, right? They're treated more favorably. They're more likely to be hired at jobs. They're more likely to be offered better salaries, so on and so forth, because we think these people must be amazing because they're beautiful, right? Um, and on the side here, I show you that beauty is an interesting concept because a lot of times we are comparing ourselves or other people with people who just routinely Photoshop themselves, right? So you walk in as a regular looking person and your HR rep then is confronted by someone else who, looks amazing, and they hire the person who looks amazing, and they only think that that person looks amazing because they're seeing all these Photoshop versions of people. Most of us are pretty regular looking, and so what is beautiful is good is kind of problematic. Okay, so this is kind of a controversial research paper, but the results are really interesting. So this paper was about donation research. So again, we're talking about the need to give. So there's a stereotype in the psychology literature called beautiful is good. So this stereotype essentially shows that consumers think that people who are beautiful are smarter, they're more capable, um, they make better job candidates, so on and so forth. So there are so many positive effects associated with being attractive, right? Essentially, and research has shown this over and over again. But this paper, and I believe it was in the Journal of Marketing, shows one area where attractiveness won't help, and that is with empathy. So, what the researchers did is they looked to see how consumers, potential donors respond to a more attractive child versus a less attractive child um, when it came to giving money to um, the charity that the child was representing, right? So you've seen these pictures of children who may be starving or children who are malnourished or these type of things. So what they did was they put what they called a highly attractive child or a lower attractive child in an ad for a donation. And what they found was that if um, there was a low level of need, right? So the need for the charity, maybe it was like, oh, a small town got flooded, right? Small town got flooded, which is important, but wouldn't necessarily qualify as a high need situation. So we would call this a low need situation. In this low need situation, people were less willing to give money to the charity that featured an attractive child, but were more willing to donate money to the charity that featured an unattractive child. Right? So, again, when it was a low need donation situation, in this case, my example is a small town flooding. The charity itself would get less money in donations if they put out an attractive child as their cover person, versus a less attractive child, right? They would get more money if they showed a less attractive child. This effect, however, goes away if it's a high need situation. So if it's a monsoon or a hurricane or a really bad earthquake, then it really doesn't matter if the child is more or less attractive. Consumers will donate the same. It's just that when the need is low, you actually make more money by putting a less attractive child on the cover of your ads. So again, somewhat controversial, but really interesting. And again, it leads back to this idea that beautiful is good, right? So because people who are beautiful are expected to be more capable, in low need situations, people just assume that they don't really need a lot of money because they're beautiful. Consumers also have the need for info. That's one of the reasons we watch TV or we read. It fuels our internet usage. One thing to remember is that information plays an important role in persuasion, right? If an ad appears when a consumer needs information, they are more likely to pay attention than when they don't need the information, right? So let's say, you're pregnant and the ad comes on for diapers or Pampers or whatever, you're more likely to attend to the situation or the information than if you weren't pregnant and really didn't care about, diapers. But the need for info doesn't necessarily mean that we act on that information, right? So, um, last year, the total number of STD cases in America was about 110 million. New STD cases in America, 20 million, and half of that 20 million was fueled by people ages 15 to 24. Now, we can kind of have a conversation of why this might be the case, but I think certainly we could say that it's not because people don't know what STDs are and people don't know how to protect themselves from STDs. I feel like for a lot of people, that level of knowledge or knowledge about those two topics is pretty kind of well known. And if that's the case, people have knowledge about these topics and kind of these issues. The question becomes, why aren't people acting on these topics and this information? People also tend to have a need for financial security, or as we like to call it, financial well-being. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, says that financial security is a state of being wherein a person can fully meet current and ongoing financial obligations so they can pay their bills, can feel secure in their future financial future, and is able to make choices that allow them to enjoy life. So, what does that mean? Uh, it means a few things. That means, in terms of security, the person has control over their day to day and month to month finances. In the present and in the future, they can absorb a financial shock. Now, that's important. In the future, you can absorb a financial shock. It also means, in terms of security, I'm sorry, not security, in terms of freedom of choice in the present, consumers who have financial security is that they have the freedom to make choices to enjoy life in the present, and in the future, they're on track to meet their financial goals. Now, I'm looking at this and I'm wondering how many people would actually say that they're financially secure given kind of these four elements of financial well being. And I don't have this as a think break, but I'll let you kind of think about what percentage of consumers you think are have financial security based on kind of these four elements. Well, well, well. So, some data here. So, McKinsey and Company asked consumers some questions to look at consumer sentiment. They do this every year, but in this survey, they show differences in attitudes between 2009 and 2016.
So, in response to this question or statement, I am worried that I or a member of my household will lose a job in the next year. In 2009, 50% of consumers said this is true. In 2016, 36% said that this was true. I am living paycheck to paycheck. In 2009, 51% of consumers says this was true. In 2016, only 24% of consumers. And then uh, I am finding it harder to make ends meet than 12 months ago. In 2009, 48% of consumers said this was true. In 2016, 19% of consumers said this was true. So it looks like consumers feel better about their own financial situation. And you can see this play out in other questions. Um, I am increasingly looking for ways to save money. Interestingly enough, in 2010, 70% of consumers said this was true. In 2016, only 42%, which suggests that consumers are no longer looking for ways to find money. I am looking for sales and promotions, 42 to 35. I am paying more attention to prices. Now, this is a huge jump. In 2010, 63% of respondents said they are paying attention to prices. In 2016, only 34% of consumers said that that was still true. This paints a picture that the economy has gotten better, or at least consumers perceive that it's gotten better, that consumers are less worried about their finances. And frankly, I would argue that it shows that a lot of consumers feel more financially secure. When we look at women versus men, we see that there are some differences, but the differences aren't that great. Yeah, sure. 38% of women don't have retirement savings versus 30% of men. Um, and that is a big deal, right? We need to put these numbers on a more equal footing. But at the same time, it looks like men and women both don't seem like they have a lot of money saved for retirement. Although I will say, kind of just as a caveat, is kind of a way to think about this. When they ask women how they think the state of their finances will be in the next 12 months, what they found is that millennial women, those who are 21 and 34, said that they were fairly confident that their finances would be good, right? Gen X, 55%, Gen Z, 55%. In general, women tended to be fairly optimistic about the state of their finances. So, for a recap, it looks like people are pretty confident or secure, I would say, in their finances. People feel pretty good. Women and men are on about equal footing, and they feel pretty good about their finances. And yet we've seen in the news headlines that suggest that a $500 car repair bill will send most Americans scrambling. CBS News says most Americans can't handle a $500 surprise bill. Fortune magazine says 63% of Americans can't cover unexpected expenses. What is going on here? Why is it that people feel as though they're financially secure, but yet if something were to happen, a $500 car repair bill would leave consumers scrambling. Where is the disconnect between these two things? Or is there a disconnect? Is it that financial security is really all of these things that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau says it is, CFPB, or is it that, you know, consumers are optimistic without a real reason to be about their finances? You tell me. I kind of shot the gun there. This was a think break question. Now you tell me.
We also have a need for variety, and we usually call this variety seeking buying behavior, and we measure it all the time in marketing. It describes a person's desire to search for alternative products, even when they are satisfied with the current product. I am absolutely this person. I can be absolutely satisfied by a product, but still try other products. I do it all the time. So what companies may do so that they don't lose that business is that they introduce different versions of original products, right? So the new Coke, or I'm sorry, Coke Zero, was introduced, and they figured, how many people who normally drink Coke will gravitate toward this brand, so they don't have to look elsewhere if they're a variety seeking group. And it turns out quite a few. A lot of the people who decided to start drinking Coke Zero were drinking regular Coke, 65% of them. 5% were drinking Coke Light, 5% were drinking Diet Coke. 15% were drinking Pepsi, and 10% were drinking something else. So when you introduce these different versions of your original, yes, you might cannibalize yourself a bit, but what you're trying to do, or your aim, is to make sure that people don't go to the next brand, right? Because they want more variety and you're not offering it. The benefit of it is also, one, you're kind of keeping people under your brand's umbrella, but it also may allow you to um, take some of, a competitor's product, right? So to take market share from a competitor, I should say. So, for example, in this example, 25% of people who now drink Coke Zero were drinking something else. You could also think of other companies that produce large varieties of goods. I'm thinking soap. So Dove, for example, is constantly bringing out new soap varieties. And they do that again so that you don't switch to other soaps. You might also have a need to possess things. So you might acquire products just because you need or want to own a product. You can think of people who are collectors. You can think of people who, get knickknacks around their house. Lots of people will fall under this category, or I should say, lots of buying behaviors would fall under this category, not people, buying behaviors. So, yeah. The need to possess does play a role in impulse buying. So, a consumer unexpectedly experiences a sudden and powerful urge to buy something immediately. And this is, again, down to or caused by the need to possess, right? So you could say a new product comes out and you feel compelled to buy it because, you know, impulse buying. We have social image needs. And oftentimes we see that played out in conspicuous consumption. So, conspicuous consumption is your obtaining a product or acquiring a product so that you can display that product or service, I should say, um, to show off your status, right? So you are motivated to show people how successful you are. That could be monetarily successful. It could be, you own a pen collection and you want to show people that you've been really great about collecting pens. Um, I collect Barbies. I don't think I have this like desire for people to see the Barbies because I mainly keep them in my office. Anyway, companies often reinforce the notion that products enable you to communicate your social image, right? All the time. Um, And it's crazy. Sometimes they do it deliberately, sometimes they do it subtly. And I should note, consumers do it as well. So there was this trend a few years ago where people would post pictures of themselves with Starbucks cups, right? And they always made sure to show the label as Starbucks because they wanted to reinforce the social image that they're cool and they're drinking expensive coffee. I mean, it got to the point where people were photoshopping the Starbucks logo on people's, Instagram or whatever. So they would have a white cup and they would just, you know, Photoshop it, which sounds nuts, but that's what they do. And so remember, and I say this deliberately, that companies can reinforce this, but consumers can also reinforce the notion that products enable you to communicate your social image. So we also have a need for pleasure, and so we buy products, services, and we engage in other consumption activities to provide us with fun and excitement, right? And that makes sense to me. Lots of us do it. One thing, though, that we tend to do a lot is use social media. And some of the people who were instrumental in kind of creating social media have come out and said that social media is horrible for moods and attitudes and mental health. And we've seen a lot of research that backs this up. There have been a lot of studies, for example, that say that girls with depression spend more time on social media. And the question becomes, which came first? Is it that depressed girls spend a lot of times on social media as a way to forget about their life or alleviate kind of these sad feelings? Or is it that these same, or is it, I shouldn't say same, or is it that these girls are depressed because they spend so much time on social media, right? And it's a chicken and an egg situation. I would probably, off the top of my head, choose the latter, right? We see the same kind of effect here in this bar graph or bar chart. That you do see this increase for men. The curve is not as steep and it's not as consistent as it is with women. So girls who spend 5+ hours a week, about almost 40% of them say that they are depressed. And I think this is something that, again, needs more research because you do want to find this chicken and egg. Although a study like this would be really hard because you'd have to find people who've never used social media who might have depression and a control group who's never used social media and try to figure out what's going on. But in general, social media, a lot of people believe is not good for mental health. That is the end of my lecture. I hope that you are having a great day or great several days, and I thank you for listening.